Now, snapshot isolation will prevent all four possible concurrency issues. The way that it does this is by utilizing versioning. Basically, when I use Snapshot, I'm going to get my own version of the data or my own basically little sandbox that I can play with inside of TempDB. And through the use of versioning, SQL will ensure that the data that I'm looking at is consistent from when I started my transaction. You'll also notice that with versioning, people will be able to modify their version, if you will, without impacting anybody else. Now, because of the fact that this is going to incur additional overhead on TempDB, this does require that the option be enabled on the database. This is not enabled by default. Additionally, it's worth noting that updates may cause errors. If I select some data, somebody else modifies that data, which remember again, they're allowed to do because they're working on their own version, and then I go back to update my data, what's going to happen is this is going to cause my update to fail at that point. Let's take a look at Snapshot here. So what I'm going to do is bring back up my Management Studio, and you'll notice that I've already got a little query window that has the appropriate command to enable snapshot isolation. And you'll notice that it's just simply alter database, specify the name, set allow snapshot isolation on. Now keep in mind that your DBA is going to be the one responsible for executing that, and that will need to be done before snapshot isolation works. So let's come back over here to my other query window. And what I'm going to do is instead of using serializable, just going to change that to snapshot, but I'm going to leave everything else the same. Now, what I want you to notice is that when I execute everything on the left-hand side, so that there are my 12 Harrisons, so you'll notice sure enough, boom, 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 there's all my 12 Harrisons. Over here on the right-hand side, let's go ahead and try and put in a brand new Harrison. And you'll notice that when I execute the right-hand side, this does in fact succeed. The reason for that is because the version that my person on the left is playing with is different than the version that my person on the right was playing with. And you'll also notice that if I come back and I issue yet another select statement, I'm still getting only those 12 rows. So again, if you look down at the bottom, you notice only 12 rows. However, over on the right-hand side, if I said select last name from person contact, where last name equals Harrison, and let's just do something like this, contact ID, you'll notice that contact ID 1 is in fact Harrison. We're getting 13 rows on the right-hand side. The reason for the disparity is two separate versions. The last thing to note about snapshot isolation is a little problem you can wind up running into on a potential day-to-day basis. And that is if you try to modify data that somebody else has already gone in and modified where you had a previous version. Now, one of the little things to keep in mind is that if somebody modified some data that you weren't necessarily looking at, that actually won't impact your operation because you're looking at your version. So for example, if I come over here to the snapshot side of things and I said update person contact, set first name equal to Christopher, where last name equals Harrison, what you're going to notice is 12 rows affected. Now, I again want to highlight there's actually currently 13 Harrisons. You can see that over on the right-hand side. But we have a previous version on the left-hand side. As a result, we're only modifying 12 rows because that's all that we see. However, if we tried to modify something that somebody else had modified, that's where we're going to wind up running into a possible error. So if I change this and I said instead, where contact ID equals 1, and I again highlight this, now what you're going to notice is we get an error message telling us snapshot isolation transaction aborted due to update conflict. You cannot use snapshot isolation to access table person contact directly or indirectly in database AdventureWorks to update, delete, or insert the row that has been modified or deleted by another transaction, retry the transaction, or change the isolation level for the update delete statement. I want you to memorize that. There'll be a quiz on that tomorrow. No, in English, here's basically what this is trying to tell me. The data's changed. There you go. That simple. Is that I was looking at one version of the data, but when I started, that data changed. As long as I keep trying to read, I'm always going to see the version of the data that I was playing with. But if I try to modify something that has been changed, that's going to fail, and that's why this failed out. That is how we control concurrency, transactions, and locking. We'll see you in the next lesson.